Every every grand human endeavor needs a plan, right? A blueprint, a director. Think about skyscrapers. They need those foundational plans. Blockbuster movies. They live and die by their shooting schedules. And for our digital world, well, for every app, every secure network, all that innovation driving, global commerce, there's something just as vital, IT project management. And honestly, without that structure, that rigorous planning and execution, the world's most ambitious tech ideas, whether it's a bank migrating its core systems or, say, a university launching a new student portal, they just collapse. They fail before they even deliver any real value. So today, we're doing a deep dive. We're really getting into the foundational blueprints for digital success. Our mission here is to equip you, the IT leaders of tomorrow, with the strategic know-how to, well, move beyond just knowing the definitions and actually start evaluating situations. We're going to unpack the methods, the key metrics, the guiding principles that make sure tech projects don't just get finished, but actually deliver real measurable value on time and hopefully within budget.
Exactly. And, for those of you specifically in BCIS 5351, this deep dive is, well, it's absolutely essential stuff. We're looking at where project management came from, its history, but focusing really heavily on why it's so critical for making complex IT projects, actually succeed more often. And this isn't just theory, right? We emphasize the core concepts, the techniques, but then we require you to apply them immediately. That's through the group project, a really key part of the course where you'll act as a project manager or a really active team member. So by the end of this, the goal is you'll have mastered those foundational knowledge outcomes, what we call the KOs, things like explaining the core PM concepts, that's KO1, evaluating real-world situations where you need to apply these concepts, that's KO2, and demonstrating, the key terms and techniques, KO3. But just as important, maybe even more so, are the skills outcomes, the SOs. You'll be developing research skills, SO1. You'll practice managing the different connected phases of a project, SO2. And critically, you'll learn to work effectively in a team to get that semester project done, which is SO3.
Exactly. It really is about building your career architecture, foundational skills. Okay, now, before we really dive into the complex stuff, the interplay between principles and processes, please just take a quick second right now. We'd like this deep dive, follow us, share it with your network, and definitely check the episode description. We put links in there to extra resources that really expand on what we're talking about today, especially around some of those more advanced metrics like EVM we'll get to later. Okay, all right, let's unpack this whole thing. So we have to start with the basic definition, right? But let's quickly pivot to why it matters strategically. We know the definition. A project is a temporary endeavor undertaken to create a unique product, service, or result. Okay. But the strategic question, especially for you, for a graduate audience thinking about IT project management, is where does the project actually end? And where do, the permanent operations begin?
That transition point. That's often where governance can kind of break down, yeah. And it highlights that fundamental difference between projects and operations. Operations, as you said, they're the ongoing, repetitive things that just keep the business running. Think payroll processing, routine server checks, keeping the lights on, basically. They're continuous, highly standardized. But a project, it's temporary. It has a definite start, a definite end. And the thing it creates, it's unique. It's the whole journey of creating that new thing, that new capability that operations will then take over and sustain later on.
Right. And because that deliverable is unique and it's being produced under all sorts of constraints, time, budget, resources, you've got inherent uncertainty baked in, don't you? Which brings us to a really vital concept, especially in the, let's face it, pretty volatile world of IT. Progressive elaboration.
Progressive elaboration. Yeah, it's basically a formal way of saying, hey, we don't know everything right at the start, and that's okay. Unlike building maybe a simple bridge where the physics are pretty fixed, in IT requirements change, technology evolves during the project, stakeholders suddenly understand things differently halfway through. So progressive elaboration is that process of continuously improving the plan, adding more detail as you get more specific information, as your estimates get more accurate. It's really a fundamental mindset shift. You plan as far ahead as you reasonably can with some confidence, and then you refine that plan as you execute, as you learn more. You have to stay flexible.
Okay, so to manage all that complexity, to kind of formalize that progressive approach, we lean on the industry standard, right? The Project Management Institute's PMBOK, the Project Management Body of Knowledge. And it's important to stress, this isn't just a rule book. It's more like an integrated collection of best practices, knowledge, drawn from decades of real-world industry experience, government policies.
Exactly. And absolutely central to the PMBOK are the 5 process groups. Now, this is where we really need to shift away from thinking in straight lines. These 5 groups, they're interdependent. They're actions and activities that happen across the entire project lifecycle. They are definitely not just sequential steps you do once and then tick off a list.
Okay, good point. Let's detail these 5 then, maybe emphasizing how they function in a modern IT project context, which is often, let's be honest, kind of a hybrid approach these days.
Yeah.
So, first up, initiating. This is formal start, right? Getting things rolling. We define the why, the project's purpose. We get the official authorization, maybe allocate some high-level resources. In IT, this often means hammering out the business case, creating the project charter, identifying who the key stakeholders are, and crucially, formally appointing the project manager, getting that authority.
Then second, you have planning. This is where you establish the scope, what's in, what's out. You refine the objectives, you define the requirements, the course of action. Now, in a really traditional waterfall type world, this could mean massive upfront documentation. But in modern IT, especially with hybrid or agile approaches, planning and executing are much more interwoven. You might plan the next 2-week sprint in intense detail, but only have very high-level plans for what's happening 6 months down the road, which, perfectly embraces that idea of progressive elaboration we just talked about.
Okay, third is executing. This is, well, doing the work, the coding, the building, configuring things, deploying systems. But it's more than just the technical work, right?
Yeah.
In modern PM, execution also involves managing the team dynamics, getting the resources you need when you need them, and actively managing stakeholder expectations, keeping everyone informed and aligned.
Fourth is monitoring and controlling.
Yeah.
Think of this as running diagnostics constantly. It's happening all the time alongside execution. You're tracking progress, reviewing performance against the plan you made, identifying where things are maybe going off track, where changes are needed, and then you initiate those formal change requests. It's that continuous feedback loop.
Right. And finally, number 5, closing. This is formally wrapping things up. You confirm acceptance crucially. The customer or client formally signs off on the product or service. And you document lessons learned, what went well, what didn't, so you don't make the same mistakes next time. Defining closing in IT is really important. The project isn't closed until that unique thing you build is complete and successfully handed over to the operations team for ongoing maintenance, support, sustainment.
Yes, precisely. And the key strategic insight here, I think, is that while those 5 process groups are applied during the project, the overall project lifecycle is different. That defines the broader, usually sequential phases. So whether you use a simple 4-phase life cycle like, say, starting the project, organizing and preparing, carrying out the work, and closing, or maybe a more detailed 7-phase model, the point is those 5 process groups, they get repeated, iterated within each phase. And this iterative application, it ensures that as the project moves forward, the project management team is constantly learning, improving its knowledge, reducing uncertainty, and just gaining better awareness of what's really going on.
Okay, so once we get that foundational structure, the PMBOK process groups running throughout the life cycle, we then face a major strategic choice, right? Which development path do we take? And this leads us straight into that classic, sometimes heated methodology debate, waterfall versus agile. This is a critical evaluation point that's KO2 thinking for any IT project manager.
Absolutely. Let's start with waterfall. It's the traditional, the classic approach. Very linear, very predictive. It basically mandates that each distinct stage, think planning, then analysis, then design, implementation, testing, operations. Each one has to be fully completed, reviewed, probably signed off before the next one can even begin. It's highly sequential. The output of one stage becomes the fixed, unchangeable input for the next. This gives you a lot of control, theoretically, but it sacrifices speed and especially flexibility.
So when would this kind of rigid sequential approach actually be the smart strategic choice? When is it an advantage?
Well, it really shines when predictability and heavy documentation are absolutely paramount. So it's the best fit when you know the requirements in almost excruciating detail right from the very beginning, and you expect very minimal changes along the way. Think about projects with super strict regulatory requirements, maybe upgrading a core banking system where you have to meet specific compliance standards, detailed documentation needed for auditors, or maybe government projects needing things like FSMA or FedRAMP compliance documented up front. It's also good for fixed timelines, fixed budgets, especially if you're working on maybe enhancing current legacy products where the effects of changes are really well understood, very predictable.
So it's highly effective if the goal is delivering a very specific, defined feature set, sticking tightly to those fixed constraints of time and budget.
Precisely. That's its strength. But the massive downside is its risk exposure, especially in today's volatile IT environments, because you separate requirements gathering from design, from coding, from testing, often by months. If the market shifts, or a key technology changes, or the user needs evolve, that initial lockdown plan can become obsolete very quickly, which often leads to really expensive rework, delays, or sometimes outright project failure. It fundamentally discourages progressive elaboration once you start executing. The plan becomes king.
Yeah, that inherent rigidity, that lack of adaptability, is really what drove the whole industry shift towards the alternative strategy, Agile.
Exactly. Agile is fundamentally different. It's an iterative strategy. The focus is on constant, rapid delivery of working software and continuous adaptation based on feedback. It combines the development work directly with continuous customer or user feedback, usually in short cycles, typically 2 to 4 weeks long, often called sprints. The core value is an exhaustive documentation. It's delivering something functional, something that works. Frequently. It fosters flexibility, empowers the development team, authorizes them to make decisions, and it constantly prioritizes delivering the highest core value for the customer.
So if I'm, say, launching a new feature for a mobile app, or maybe developing some cutting-edge AI tool where user feedback is instant and critical, and the requirements are maybe a bit fuzzy or likely to change, Agile seems like the obvious choice then. It sounds like it helps the product owner, the business side, kind of discover what's needed innovatively as they go.
Absolutely right. The product owner is deeply involved, constantly looking at the working product, assessing how it operates in the real world, and helping prioritize what features or changes come next in the backlog. That immediate feedback loop is just crucial when requirements are uncertain or they're volatile, likely to change quickly. Which, let's face it, is incredibly common in competitive, innovation-driven sectors like software and tech.
Okay, let's dig a bit deeper into Agile, though, because while it sounds fantastic, almost like a silver bullet sometimes, it definitely comes with its own set of pretty significant organizational challenges, right? I mean, you hear the term thrown around a lot, but many people seem to misuse it or misunderstand it.
Oh, that's absolutely true. A huge pitfall is just basic organizational misunderstanding. You see this phenomenon sometimes called Scrum, but teams say, yeah, we're using the Agile Scrum framework, but we skip the daily stand-ups because we're too busy, or but we don't really do proper retrospectives. They adopt the labels, the ceremonies maybe, but not the underlying discipline, the principles. And that just leads to unsupported assumptions, miscommunications, and ultimately failure to deliver consistently. And beyond that, organizations often struggle with the discipline needed for specific agile practices. Take Scrum again, for example. If the team doesn't maintain a really clear, agreed upon, and manageable definition of done, DoD, that checklist specifying exactly what quality and completeness mean for any piece of work, well, then you end up deploying features that are buggy, unfinished, not quite right. That erodes trust, slows down future sprints, it becomes a real drag.
I've also heard, especially from folks in larger, maybe publicly traded companies, that the iterative nature of Agile makes it incredibly hard to estimate the final cost and the total benefits way up front, which is exactly what the annual budgeting process demands, right? Corporate finance wants certainty that Agile, by its nature, often can't provide right at the beginning.
That is a major, major hurdle. That difficulty in providing precise long-range cost and benefit estimates clashes directly with traditional budgeting cycles that demand detailed financial plans and fixed requirements locked down early in the fiscal year. And this often leads to resistance from management, from finance, who are saying, look, just show us the fixed scope and the final budget number now, which of course completely defeats the purpose of Agile's iterative discovery and adaptation. The smart project manager has to find ways to strategically tailor the Agile approach. Maybe integrate periodic high-level cost checkpoints or range estimates to satisfy those financial stakeholders without sacrificing the core flexibility. It's a balancing act.
So whether we ultimately choose waterfall or Agile, or maybe some kind of hybrid mix, the source materials we looked at make a really strong strategic point. Just rigidly sticking to any unmodified off-the-shelf methodology that often leads to project failure. Why is that kind of organizational dogma, just following the book blindly, so dangerous here?
Well, the data on this is pretty compelling. You see many organizations, they invest huge amounts of time and money implementing these methodologies that are, in principle, excellent. But they might be totally unsuitable for their specific projects or their company culture or just their level of project management maturity. And the result, you get decreased staff morale because people are fighting the process, tons of wasted effort filling out forms that don't add value in their context. The fault usually isn't with the methodology itself, it's with applying it inappropriately without modifying it to fit the situation.
Right. And this is where you, our graduate student audience, really need to lean in because survey data actually suggests that, yes, 71% of practitioners who don't have a defined methodology think having one would boost their project success rates. Okay, that makes sense. But the real strategic nugget, the key insight, is that the data also strongly suggests the more tailoring of a project management methodology, the greater the level of project success.
That is the absolute core takeaway. Think about it. If the official standardized methodology isn't tailored by the PM and the team to fit the project, what happens? Individual team members, they'll just start modifying the process on their own anyway, informally, creating their own little undocumented, unique ways of working around the official process because it doesn't fit. And that completely wipes out any efficiency gains you were hoping for from standardization. Plus, the PM loses visibility and control over quality and consistency. So tailoring isn't just nice to have, it's an essential leadership responsibility for the project manager.
Okay, so let's define this art of tailoring then. What exactly does the project manager need to adapt? What are they adjusting?
Tailoring basically means the PM, working closely with the team, consciously adapts the project's approach, its governance structure, like how decisions are made, who approves things, and the specific processes required. And this adaptation is based entirely on the specific context of that project. It's always an iterative process, too, not just a one-time decision at the start. And the goal is always to optimize the outcome, balancing that triangle of value delivered, the cost, and the time it takes. Now, the factors you consider when tailoring, they're complex. You have to account for, obviously, the uniqueness of the project itself, but also things like the organization's overall maturity in project management, its culture, is it collaborative or command and control, the project size, its technical complexity, how long it's expected to run, and then crucial external constraints, maybe mandatory financial limits imposed from above, specific regulatory compliance rules you absolutely have to follow, like HIPAA in healthcare, or maybe strict industry-specific standards. All of that feeds into the tailoring decisions.
And this shift towards focusing on context, moving away from just rigidly following rules, it leads to a really important philosophical change in modern project management, doesn't it? Prioritizing principles over process. We often look back at, well, catastrophic failures to see why this matters so much.
Yes, exactly. Those cautionary tales, like the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster or maybe the bankruptcy of Kodak, they're often cited as examples. In cases like those, you could argue that the established processes, which were originally designed to ensure stability or safety, actually ended up becoming obstacles. Why? Because decision-making adhered strictly to the rulebook, even when core strategic principles were being violated. For Challenger, for instance, you could say chasing the launch schedule following that process tragically superseded the fundamental principle of safety first. The key takeaway is that processes must serve the principles. They shouldn't become more important than the principles themselves.
Right. And the Project Management Institute's latest guide, the PMBOK 7th edition, really formalizes this shift. It outlines 12 core principles that should guide a project manager's decisions, including how they tailor their approach.
Let's maybe focus on, say, 4 really essential principles that are particularly relevant for guiding IT project success.
Okay, good idea. First, let's take principle 4. Focus on value. This is huge. It mandates that we focus on the outcome the project delivers, not just the output. So we're not just delivering lines of code or installing servers, that's output. We're delivering the ability for the organization to, say, generate more revenue or reduce operational risk or improve customer satisfaction. That's outcome, that's value. Value is the ultimate indicator of project success, and the PM's job is to constantly manage scope, resources, everything to maximize the value delivered.
Value. What's next? Second, principle 5. Recognize, evaluate, and respond to system interactions, or simply systems thinking. This is incredibly important in today's interconnected IT environments. The PM has to analyze the wider system that the project exists within. You have to recognize all the interdependent parts, the interacting domains of activity. So if your project is upgrading a central database schema, what's the knock-on effect on the 15 downstream reporting systems that rely on it? Systems thinking forces you to take that holistic view, to see the connections.
Makes sense. Avoid unintended consequences. Third principle.
Third, back to our main theme here, principle 7, tailor based on context. This just reinforces the absolute necessity to account for the project's uniqueness, its constraints, the risks involved, all to optimize that balance of value, cost, and time. It also implicitly involves mitigating the risk of what's called plan continuation bias. You know, that very human tendency for a team to stick rigidly to the original plan long after evidence suggests it's no longer the best path forward. This principle forces you to constantly ask, is our approach still right for this context? It demands adaptability.
And that leads nicely into the fourth one you wanted to highlight.
Exactly. Principle 11, embrace adaptability and resilience. Adaptability is about being able to respond effectively to changing conditions. Maybe a sudden critical security vulnerability is discovered, or a competitor launches a disruptive new product. Resilience is slightly different. It's the ability to absorb those kinds of impacts, those shocks, recover quickly, and keep making progress towards the goal. In the modern threat landscape of IT, with the cybersecurity risks and rapid market changes, both adaptability and resilience are absolutely vital. So these principles, they act like strategic guardrails, guiding all those tailoring decisions the PM has to make.
Now, the environment where a project actually happens, the organizational structure itself, that heavily influences how these principles get applied in practice, doesn't it? I mean, whether the organization is set up as functional or matrix or fully projectized, that really dictates the project manager's level of authority, their access to resources, things like that. Our source materials mention large government organizations like the Bureau of Reclamation often operate in functional or maybe weak matrix structures.
That's right. And in those kinds of complex environments where project managers often have to negotiate for resources and share priority setting with functional department managers, the Project Management Office, PMO, becomes incredibly important, often indispensable. A PMO does more than just provide templates or support. A mature PMO establishes the organizational governance standards, it maintains the repositories for project documentation, lessons learned, and crucially, it often defines and maintains the organization's overall project management maturity model. How sophisticated are we at this? Where do we need to improve? A really strong PMO, which you often see in highly regulated or IT-intensive environments, might be centralized and even take direct responsibility for managing major projects, kind of like a strong matrix approach.
Okay, so the PMO often dictates how governance is enforced. And this sounds like where we hit some practical friction in the real world. You hear stories all the time about project managers deliberately bypassing required governance steps, things like formal gate reviews between phases or quality audits. Why? Because they're laser focused on hitting that next milestone date they promised the customer or sponsor, so they maybe complete the quality checklist or the gate review document after the fact, retrospectively. Which kind of defeats the whole purpose of having those controls in the first place, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's a major failure of compliance and it introduces huge risks. To really solve this, you need absolute buy-in from senior management. Management has to agree up front on the level of quality required for different types of projects. You simply cannot manage quality retrospectively by filling out forms after the work is done. It doesn't work. Practical solutions. Well, you need mandatory transparency. Often this is best achieved through automated process management systems, project management software tools, basically. These tools can make it easy for the PM to complete required documentation. They can trigger automatic approval workflows, and they can ensure that the recorded quality checkpoints are actually built into the execution path. They become unavoidable steps, not just optional paperwork to be done later. Maybe. You also need clear governance handbooks specifying requirements up front.
Okay, that need for appropriate rigor, depending on the project, ties directly into this idea of scalability, doesn't it? Project management isn't one size fits all. It has to adapt to the size, the complexity, the importance of the specific project. So organizations typically categorize projects to figure out the right level of oversight, documentation, and, well, process burden required.
Exactly right. Project categorization is usually based on two main dimensions. First, complexity, which includes things like the type of project. Are there heavy federal regulations involved? How many stakeholders are there? How complex is the technology? And second, often simpler but still important, the dollar value or budget. Let's use the dollar thresholds mentioned in the materials as a kind of guide to the expected level of rigor. So, at the low end, projects maybe under, say, $1 million are often classified as basic. These would require fundamental, probably quite streamlined management processes. Keep it simple but controlled. Moving up, projects perhaps between $1 million and $10 million, or maybe lower cost projects that still warrant special management attention because they're super high risk or critical to the organization's mission, those often fall into the standard category. More formal process is needed here.
Okay, and then what happens when we cross that $10 million mark or things get really complex?
Right. Projects over $10 million that demand special management attention are typically categorized as complex, and the implications here are significant. These projects often have mandatory requirements for much more detailed planning artifacts, like a formal, detailed work breakdown structure, WBS, breaking the work down into small, manageable packages. And then there's the highest category mentioned, complex, with OMB 300. These are typically major IT acquisitions within the U.S. federal government sphere. They require specific, rigorous government reporting formats, like the OMB 300 exhibit, and critically often mandate that a PMI-certified project management professional, PMP, must be assigned an irresponsible charge of the project. So you can see the level of mandatory oversight, reporting, regulatory burden, it ramps up dramatically as you move up through these categories.
In all this complexity, managing scope, dealing with budgets, hitting deadlines, it inevitably brings us back to that core balancing act every single project manager lives with daily, the quadruple constraint.
Ah, yes, the constraints. We often talk about the iron triangle: scope, time, and cost. When we expand that to the quadruple constraint, we're explicitly adding quality into that mix. And the key thing to understand is that these four are tightly interrelated. It's essentially a zero-sum game. If you change any one of these factors, you must adjust at least one of the others to maintain balance. For example, if the customer suddenly wants to increase the scope, add more features, well, you absolutely have to increase the cost or extend the time or potentially accept a decrease in quality. You can't just absorb it for free without consequence.
That relationship between scope and quality seems particularly important for our audience to grasp. How do we strategically define quality in this constraint model? It's not just about making something fancy, right?
No, definitely not. Quality at a strategic project management level is really achieved by managing the scope effectively to ensure the project reliably delivers the required functions or features, nothing more and nothing less. We often talk about two critical aspects here. Conformance to requirements, meaning, does the product or service meet the documented specifications we agreed upon? And fitness for use, meaning, can the customer actually use the product as they intended to achieve their goals? Delivering the commensurate product, the one that matches what was defined in the scope, relates directly to achieving product quality. It's about fitness for purpose. Think about it. If the customer asks for a reliable bicycle, that's the scope, and you delivered a high-performance Lamborghini, you haven't achieved quality in product terms. Even though the Lamborghini might be objectively better in some ways, you failed on scope management, probably blew the budget cost, and maybe even missed the deadline time. You delivered the wrong thing.
Okay, so the project is planned, categorized, tailored, and now it's running. Effective management from here on out demands a really effective feedback loop, doesn't it? Why are continuous quantitative metrics, actual numbers, so non-negotiable for understanding project health?
Because metrics are our objective reality check. Gut feelings, subjective assessments, yeah, I think we're mostly on track. They're just not reliable, especially on complex projects. These metrics, they have to be used continuously throughout the project lifecycle, not just at the end, to allow for timely corrective actions. If you wait until the end to find out you're way over budget, it's too late. Plus, they establish that crucial historical record, data that helps you plan future projects more accurately, and fundamentally they help you prevent predictable problems like schedule slippage and budget overruns before they become catastrophic. For complex projects, relying purely on subjective estimates is, frankly, bordering on project management malpractice. You need objective data. And that brings us squarely to the gold standard for integrated performance measurement, earned value management, or EVM.
EVM. Okay, this is the methodology specifically designed to integrate scope, schedule, and resources the budget to give you an objective measure of how the project is actually performing and progressing. It's often required for those high-dollar complex projects we talked about, but you're saying the underlying philosophy should really be applied everywhere.
Absolutely. The discipline of EVM thinking is valuable on any project. Okay, so let's formally define the three foundational components you absolutely need to understand for EVM. This is key for KO3, demonstrating knowledge of terms and techniques. First, plan value, PV. This is your baseline plan expressed in dollar terms. It's the authorized budget assigned to the work that was scheduled to be completed by a specific point in time. PV essentially answers the question, according to our plan, how much money should we have spent by today? Second component, this is usually the easiest one to get, actual cost. AC. This is simply the total real cost incurred and recorded in the financial systems for the work performed up to that same specific date. It answers how much money have we actually spent so far.
Okay, PV is planned spend, AC is actual spend. Now the third one, this sounds like the crucial one, earned value, EV.
EV is the linchpin. It represents the value of the work that has actually been performed, but expressed in terms of the original approved budget for that work. It's the objective measure of progress. How do you calculate it? Usually it's the percentage complete for a given task multiplied by the total authorized budget, the PV, for that entire task. So let's say you have a task budgeted at $200,000. That's its total PV. If you assess that the task is now 50% complete, your earned value, EV, for that task at this moment is $100,000. And crucially, that $100,000 EV is true regardless of whether you actually spent $80,000 or $120,000 to get there. That's AC. And regardless of whether you plan to have spent $90,000 by now, that's PV. EV measures accomplished work in budget terms.
Got it. So you have PV planned, AC actual cost, and EV value earned. Now, we use these three numbers to calculate the really insightful performance indicators, right? We're basically measuring the difference between what actually happened and what was planned.
Exactly. Let's look at cost first. The cost variance, CV, is simply EV minus AC. CV equals EV AC. If your CV is positive, it means your earned value is greater than your actual cost fusion. You performed the work for less money than you actually spent to earn that value. That's good news. You're under budget for the work completed. If CV is negative, EV is less than AC, meaning it cost you more than planned to achieve that amount of work. You're over budget. We also look at the efficiency ratio, the cost performance index, CPI. That's EV divided by AC. CPI is EV AC. If your CPI is, say, 1.2, that means you're getting $1.20 worth of work done in terms of budgeted value for every $1 you actually spend.
Yeah.
Excellent cost efficiency. A CPI less than 1.0 means you're over budget.
Okay, that's cost performance.
Yeah.
Then we do a similar thing for the schedule, for time performance.
Precisely. The schedule variance, SV, compares earned value to planned value. SV equals EVPV. If SV is positive, it means the value you've earned, EV, is greater than the value you plan to earn by this date, PV. You've accomplished more work than planned, you're ahead of schedule. If SV is negative, EV is less than PV. You haven't completed as much work as you planned to by this point. You're behind schedule. And again, there's an efficiency index. The schedule performance index, SPI. EV divided by PV, SPI over PV. If your SPI is 0.8, it means you're only progressing at 80% of the rate you originally planned. That signals a potentially serious schedule delay if things don't change. An SPI greater than 1.0 means you're ahead of schedule.
Wow, okay. So CPI tells you budget efficiency, SPI tells you time efficiency. These indices, CPI and SPI, they seem incredibly powerful just on their own for tracking current status. But their real power comes when you use them to forecast the final outcome of the project, right? This gets into those advanced forecasting metrics, hitting KO3 again. We know the starting point, the budget at completion, BAC. That's just the total planned budget for the entire project. Simple enough. But what about forecasting the actual final cost? That's the estimated completion EAC.
Right. The EAC is your forecast. It's your prediction of the total cost that will likely be incurred to complete all the work on the project based on the performance you've seen so far. Now, there are a few different ways to calculate EAC, and the project manager has to choose the formula that best reflects the reality of the project and its future prospects. This involves some critical judgment. The first common formula, and often the most, let's say, pessimistic or conservative one, assumes that the cost performance efficiency or inefficiency you've experienced so far, measured by CPI, will continue for all the remaining work. The calculation is EAC equals BAC CPI. So if your budget at completion, BAC, was $1 million, and your current CPI is 0.8, meaning you're running 20% over budget for the work done, this formula forecasts a final cost of 1M 0.8 equals $1.25 million. It assumes that remaining work will also be 20% over budget. This is often used as the wake-up call estimate if performance has been consistently poor.
Okay, but sometimes maybe a project had a really bad start, say a critical resource quit early on, causing initial cost overruns, but management is confident they've fixed the problem and the future work will proceed efficiently back on the original budget rate.
Exactly. That scenario leads to the second common EAC formula. This one assumes that whatever cost variance you've experienced to date is an anomaly and all the remaining work will be performed exactly at the planned budget rate. The formula here is EAC equals AC plus BACEV. It takes the actual cost spent so far, AC, and adds the budgeted cost for all the remaining work, which is the total budget BAC minus the value of work already completed, EV. This often gives a more optimistic forecast than the BACPI method, as it assumes future performance will hit the plan. The PM has to choose a formula based on whether they believe the past performance issues are likely to continue or not. It's about selecting the most realistic forecast given the circumstances and risk profile.
Understood. And once you have that EAC, that forecast of the total final cost, you can also figure out two other useful things, right? The estimate to complete, ETC, and the variance at completion, VAC.
Yes. The estimate to complete, ETC, is simply how much more money you forecast you need to spend to finish the rest of the project. You calculate it as ETC equals EAC AC. It's the remaining budget needed from today forward. And the variance at completion, VAC, predicts the final budget overrun or underrun at the very end of the project. It's calculated as VC equals BAC EEC. A negative VAC means you're forecasting to finish over the original budget. So the big managerial takeaway here is really profound. Yes, formal, detailed EVM with all these calculations might only be mandatory for those really high-risk, high-cost, complex projects. But the underlying philosophy, the discipline of establishing a clear baseline plan, your PV, objectively measuring your actual progress against it, your EV, and continuously comparing that to your actual costs. You see, that thinking must be applied to all projects. Basic, standard, all of them. It's what enables those continuous, timely corrective actions we talked about, which is a core skill for managing project phases effectively, SO2.
Right. And all this rigorous planning, tailoring, executing, monitoring, controlling, measuring, it all kind of culminates in, or should be documented within, the key governing document, the Project Management Plan, PMP.
Absolutely. The PMP is the master document. It's the strategic roadmap, the comprehensive guide for execution and control. And, importantly, its contents, its level of detail, must be scaled appropriately to the category of the project. For those standard and complex projects, this PMP document needs to be pretty expensive. It absolutely must include the overall project objectives and a clear scope statement. It needs a detailed scope definition. And critically, for standard and complex, it typically requires that mandatory work breakdown structure, WBS, we mentioned earlier, that hierarchical decomposition of all the work. It also needs a detailed schedule showing milestones and who's responsible. A cost budget financial plan outlining how the money will be spent and tracked. A staffing plan detailing roles and responsibilities for the team, and then the crucial control subplans. A risk management plan identifying potential risks, assessing their impact and probability, and planning specific responses, including mitigation strategies for the high-impact ones. And a formal change management plan outlining the documented procedures for how changes to the scope, schedule, or budget baseline will be requested, reviewed, approved, and communicated. Getting these plans right and using them is absolutely essential. It's where you demonstrate those skills outcomes, particularly managing multiple related project phases effectively, SO2. Hashtag outro.
Okay, we have covered a lot of ground today. We've really taken a comprehensive deep dive, moving beyond just the basic definitions into strategic evaluation. I think we've confirmed that IT project management, at its core, it's fundamentally about, first, identifying the right methodology for the context, whether that's waterfall, agile, or more likely some kind of intelligently tailored hybrid approach. And then second, it's about rigorously maintaining constant, vigilant control over those critical quadruple constraints: scope, cost, time, and of course, quality.
Absolutely. And for all of you listening, especially you graduate students who are actively preparing for your careers right now, please remember that mastering these concepts is foundational. Everything from strategically applying those 12 PMI principles in your decision-making to correctly interpreting your CPI and SPI metrics to forecast project health and take corrective action. These are the skills employers are looking for. That required group project, it really is your proving ground, SO3. It's where you demonstrate your ability to apply research, to manage complex, interconnected phases, SO2, and, just as importantly, to work successfully as a contributing member of a project team. Ultimately, project management is the leadership skill that lets you turn abstract ideas into tangible, real-world impact.
Couldn't agree more. Now, before we sign off, I want to leave you with one final, maybe provocative thought to mull over. Something to connect this sometimes abstract management framework back to your everyday reality. Think about this. If every single IT project suddenly failed tomorrow, all the databases went down, all the networks crashed, all the apps stopped working, what part of your world would come crashing down first? Would it be your ability to transact business, to communicate, or maybe something as simple as retrieving your course materials for next week? Something to think about.
Great question. Well, thank you everyone for joining us for this deep dive into the IT project management blueprint. Please don't forget to check the episode description for those supplemental resources we mentioned. Keep exploring these topics. Remember, behind every app launch you see, every online order you place, every digital innovation that shapes our lives, there's IT project management making it possible. Until next time, keep exploring the world where ideas become projects and projects shape our future.